How's it going, oh educated ones? American History Turkey back with another video. Aw man, it's time for the first big war in American history, the French and Indian War. Contrary to the title, it was between the English and the French, and Native Americans fought on both sides. The war went on till 1763 when the British won. It ended with the Treaty of Paris of 1763, which basically said that England got most of France's land and France was basically kicked out of America. France also had to give what was essentially the Louisiana Purchase to Spain after the treaty. But the French and Indian War didn't just give England a monopoly on America, it also revealed how much the colonies didn't want to work together. During the war, Ben Franklin said, "Hey, let's try this thing I made called the Albany Plan of Union, which I based on the Iroquois Confederacy." The Albany Plan of Union was kind of like a pre-America. The colonies would be all united and work together as one rather than like tiny separate countries as they were doing then. But the colonies said, no, we don't wanna, proving just how much changed between the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War. What made the colonists super mad and started the whole process towards independence was the proclamation of 1763. King George III said that even though England had just won the land past the Appalachians in the war, no one could go there because the Native Americans were too dangerous. This was mostly because of Pontiac's rebellion. Pontiac was a native chief up in the Ohio River Valley who launched a rebellion and succeeded in being one of the few Native Americans to actually win. The colonists said, "What the heck, dude, we just won that land and we want to go there," because the colonies were becoming overcrowded. But King George said, "No, I hate you," and wouldn't give in. After that, the colonists weren't all too inclined to like the king or England. Over the next 12 years or so, England started to get even worse when it came to the colonies. They issued the Writs of Assistance, which say that officials can search and seize anything without warrants or reason. It was a free pass for the British to basically rob houses at that point if they wanted to. Then in 1764, the sugar tax was passed in order to pay off the war debts, and it ruined the colonists by lowering taxes! What? Why did the colonists, why did they hate a thing that lowered taxes? Well, this was because the colonists had been living under something called salutary neglect, which meant that the colonists had not been paying taxes on imported goods. Salutary neglect happened because England was okay with colonists not paying taxes and importing goods from other countries because it helped the economy grow. England started to strictly enforce its policy of mercantilism, which meant that America could only trade with England and its colonies, even though it had been trading with others under salutary neglect for a while now. So the Sugar Act lowered taxes from 6 cents to 3 cents on sugar and molasses. The colonists couldn't do anything about the tax because England believed in virtual representation rather than actual representation. That meant that someone in England represented the colonies, but because they didn't live in the colonies, they didn't really care that much, so they didn't really do anything. Ben Franklin sent a letter to Parliament saying, "What the heck, man? We want a real representative," and Parliament said, "I don't care, suck it up." Then, in 1765, the Stamp Act was passed, which was a tax on official or legal documents. The Stamp Act angered the lawyers and politicians because they were the ones mainly affected by the tax. Great idea getting the lawyers angry. It was repealed the next year because it led to mobs and riots. Now the colonists were furious. The Sons of Liberty were formed by Sam Adams, and they were a radical organization that was extremely violent towards the new acts and tax collectors. England was getting nervous. The colonists were getting scary violent about these things, so in the Declaratory Act of 1766, which repealed the Stamp Act, England said, "We can still tax you and all we want, and you can't stop us." Then in 1770 came one of the tipping points, the Boston Massacre. The colonists were angry about the taxes and had gotten violent, so much that England positioned troops outside the tax collection building to protect the tax collectors. On March 4, 1770, a mob started throwing oyster shells and rocks and snowballs and ice balls and anything they could find while shouting fire in an attempt to get the soldiers to shoot. Eventually, one of them did, and 5 people died. The Boston Massacre was not entirely the soldiers' fault. The first to fire did so because he thought he heard his superior tell him to, but it was just the colonists yelling it. John Adams defended the soldiers in court and won. And despite the soldiers actually, winning their case in America, England decided it was too dangerous to let the trials be held in the colonies because they would be prejudiced against any British defendants, even though the American lawyers had just proved themselves unbiased when John Adams defended the soldiers of the Boston Massacre. But whatever. Tensions were high, taxes were high, old-timey wig sales were high. Then, in 1773, the Boston Tea Party happened. England had an agreement with the East India Tea Company to only sell its tea to the colonies because it was cheap and England was broke. So England said, "You colonies can drink this awful cheap tea." And the colonies said, "No, we hate that cheap stuff." Because even though they were Americans, they were still British. And British gotta have their tea. So this really set them off. In December, when the shipment was sitting in the harbor, the Sons of Liberty got a little drunk, probably Sam Adams is doing, and decided to yeet crates into the harbor while dressed as Native Americans as their disguise. England was furious. They had wasted millions of dollars of merchandise in today money, so England decided to shut down their government. Can't do nothing if you can't meet about it. In 1774, they passed the Coercive Acts, called the Intolerable Acts in the colonies, which was what shut down the Massachusetts legislature in the first place, and enacted the Quartering Act, saying that the colonists had to house and feed soldiers against their will. The colonists were mad. It's one thing to tax them, but to completely shut down their government, they had had enough. They set up a secret meeting in Philadelphia and called the Continental Congress on what to do about this nonsense. You might be thinking, "Aw man, this is where they write the Declaration of Independence." Well, no. The colonists had not really considered independence until the first shots had been fired at Lexington and Concord. It was definitely not their first goal at the meeting. At the First Continental Congress in 1774, the representatives were just there to deal with the Intolerable Acts. They arranged boycotts and started telling colonists to make their own goods without help from England goods. England started sending over more and more troops to prepare for the inevitable war, which really made the Quartering Act a painful one. When nothing changed, the Second Continental Congress met in 1775 after the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. Yeah, now we declare independence. No, not quite yet. The representatives weren't quite ready to commit to actually separating, so they made one last attempt at peace with the Olive Branch Petition, which they sent to the king saying, "Hey, if you call off the troops and ease off on the Intolerable Acts, we can get through this." It's most likely that King George didn't even bother to read the petition, and Congress started to put together the Continental Army. War was now inevitable. The same representatives returned in 1776 for the writing and signing of the Declaration of Independence. An American history dog has returned to tell us about the main founding fathers. Everyone liked George Washington. James Madison was quiet. John Adams was a lawyer, and Sam Adams was quite violent. John Hancock wrote his name real big, while Ben Franklin invented. Thomas Jefferson wrote a declaration. John Dickinson was resented. Now time to tell you more about John Dickinson, our representatives at these meetings. He was the biggest wimp there. John was a pacifist Quaker who thought that we should keep reasoning with the king even after he ignored the Olive Branch Petition and kept sending over soldiers and didn't ease off on the Intolerable Acts. Whatever, let's just have peace or something. When it came for time for the signing of the Declaration, they told him not to come, and he didn't, because he was too much of a wimp to sign the Declaration anyway. Return next time to see how it ends. Does America win its freedom, or are we still living in England? Tune in next time to American History Turkey. And hey, you should subscribe, because it's a known fact that people who aren't subscribed are less cool than people who are. Leave a comment about the video if you feel like it. Did I miss your favorite part in American history before the Revolution? Well, let me know. And hey, you should give this video a like, because, why not? And if I get to 10 subscribers, I'll do a special surprise video, so tell your friends. Until next time, gobble gobble, your great's in trouble.